Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are very excited to kick it off with Charlie Bachtell, founder and CEO of Cresco Labs. Thanks for making the time to join us, Charlie. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Glad to be here.
Of course. I'm super glad that you're also coming in with sort of fast and hot and ready to go. I know we were talking a little bit in the pre-show. As we're kind of coming off the holidays, not everyone is sort of fully back in the grind and the groove, but it seems like you came back in fully ready to go, which is awesome. Definitely excited to sit down and kind of talk through this past year, which I know has been incredibly busy, but also exciting, and then look ahead to 2024. Seems like a lot is teeing up to look good in general, but I never want to get, too overexcited, too hopeful, I guess. But we'll talk through all of that. Just before we get started, also a good reminder for anyone who's watching. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate always you hanging out with us. Also, hey, Jane, how you doing? But of course, if you guys have any questions, comments, just want to say hi, you're always welcome to. Just pop it in the chat. And if you have any questions, we'll get to them as we kind of go. So with all of that out of the way, would love to just start with kind of reflecting back on last year, kind of taking it from a high level, any highlights, any lowlights to throw out. What was sort of the takeaway from 2023?
Yeah, it was, 23 was I think a defining year. If you look at it from the perspective of the first half and the back half. First half, we did have still the pending acquisition of cannabis, which was definitely a part of that first half story for us. And due to circumstances, it didn't end up getting across the finish line, but it also was a realization in sort of a shaking out of what was going on in our industry at the time, and making sure that we were prepared to be successful, whether that transaction closed or didn't, was really a key for us in the first half of the year. And the decisions that we made, and the sort of plans that we put in place for the first half of the year, it was great to see them come to fruition in the second half of the year. And really the focusing on the core of the business and making sure that we got as tight as we could, and created as much sort of growth and strength out of our core in the second half of 2023 really sets us up well for 24 and wherever this industry goes in the quarters and in years ahead. So it was a defining year for us, and couldn't be more proud of the team and the way that they really came together and rallied around it and executed. So like I said, it came into 2024 ready to go.
That's fantastic. All right, well then, so again, glad that you guys set up a good year last year. Would love to talk just a little bit more about the proposed merger that went on. Would just love to hear a little bit more about, kind of what you learned from it, how you feel about the decision now, and then maybe even looking to the future of, is something like that possible in the future if the landscape changes?
Sure. Yeah, I think anytime that you go through something that substantial and significant, you'd hope that you learn a lot. And I think what we realized is there are so many things. The volatility of the sector really weighed into the viability of a transaction like that. And what it came down to for us was being able to recognize the value from divested assets, and the market for divested assets at the time were just not in line with the obligations that we had to be able to close a deal. So what you take from that is deal rationale made a lot of sense based on market dynamics that existed in 2022. But not only did it make less sense, or it really became an impossibility with market dynamics that existed in 23. But again, what it does is it makes your company and your team really sort of focus on the things that are within your control, because it was another example of things that are outside of your control really having a significant impact on performance and sort of the outcome. And by focusing on the things that we control, again, Cresco established itself with market leadership in states like Illinois, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, #1 brand portfolio for flower and concentrates and edibles, top 5. We really did a phenomenal job of executing on the things that are within our control. Margin improvement from first half of the year to the second half of the year. And again, just sort of putting ourselves in position to have success long-term in this industry, regardless of what happens on those things that are outside of our control, market dynamics, federal reform, et cetera, is we made the most of what 2023 was willing to give us, and very happy with the outcome.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's definitely very admirable to be able to kind of adjust and change. I know it's difficult to make those changes, but I think it's better than seeing something through that is always, it's always better to keep an eye on things, adjust, and kind of put yourself in the best position in 2023 and 2024. So I think you guys did a great job doing that, which is awesome.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the states. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how you're feeling about this coming year, or I guess this current year so far. What's your sense of, I guess, bigger scope, the environment, I guess, for 2024?
Sure. I mean, general environment for state regulated
for just cannabis in general. So that can be,
cannabis in general.
What's sort of the general vibe, I guess, of this year? And then we'll go into, of course, federal and then the state side of things. But just sort of general, are you feeling better, worse than 2023? What's sort of your...
Well, in true cannabis fashion, it's dynamic.
Sure, it's true.
There's some good, there's some not so great, and there's plenty in between. And so figuring out how to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves while at the same time mitigate against sort of the risks that are always in this sort of the periphery that can present themselves too, is the art and the science of having success in cannabis. And I don't think that changes in 24. Like we do have, we have potential for the largest types of catalysts that the industry could have, right? When you look at sort of the impact of potential rescheduling, the impact of potential legislative reform, with potentially end of year packages, like things could happen that present a Goldilocks scenario, but they also might not happen. And I think that's, we always, until it's done, until the ink is dry, I think cannabis has taught us over and over again as a whole, and I say us, that you can't base strategies or sort of outcomes based on things that are outside of your control here. So from that perspective, it's no different than prior years. But I would say that the proximity and the likelihood of those catalysts coming to fruition this year are greater than they ever have been. So that's a positive. And in the same vein, we've got good states in our current footprint that have plenty of growth and opportunity ahead of them. It was nice to get Ohio across the finish line from that legislative standpoint at the end of last year. Really sets up nicely, more so for maybe late 24, but 25 and on. And then you've got your Florida and your Pennsylvania that are looking really good too. So we like sort of what we have. We like where it goes. And then we also like the opportunities that are going to present themselves, because if until something happens to relieve the pressure in the state, there's going to be nice opportunities for consolidation in manageable pieces that we continue to see and evaluate and plan for. So again, if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and be as dynamic as this industry requires you to be, plenty of opportunity and success ahead.
That's great. Also, good to see from Really Reels, loving some of the PA brands and products. If you have a favorite Really Reels, let us know. Would love to hear what it is. Speaking of Pennsylvania, I know there's been a lot of focus in on, its neighbor Ohio turning on, that putting some additional pressure. Any thoughts or changes for Pennsylvania? Because I know it's an exciting state to be in. Any thoughts on getting it closer at all to adult use?
I think Pennsylvania is in the position where it's the will is there, it's the how, and that's where it gets tough to handicap from a timing perspective. But I think the expectations are still there for potentially something to happen this year that would allow for a program in 2025. Those discussions are happening, and again, optimistic. Relatively high likelihood of success on that. Feel good about it. It's an exciting state. Look, I think just like historically, these cannabis markets always learn from the ones beforehand. So you can see Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida are going to get the benefit of seeing what Illinois, New Jersey, New York did right and wrong, and try not to make the same mistakes. So I expect incrementally better outcomes with each progressive state that goes adult use by learning from the pros and cons of the prior states.
Yeah, being able to see it. Knowledge is wisdom for sure. Would love to hear about Florida a little bit still. I know is it going to make it on the ballot? All of that. Would love to hear if it does make it on the ballot, how you're feeling about if it has that support, is able to kind of pass. What's your sense kind of there as well?
Yeah, I can tell you there are others that are better positioned than me to understand the moving pieces of legislative and judicial processes in the state of Florida. But I think, look, in that you could still put Florida in that category of more likely than not. I think I don't know exactly how much more, but more likely than not. And what that would look like is a very robust adult use state. And again, I think a state that will get the benefit of seeing what these immediately prior states have done right or wrong as it relates to the conversion from a medical to an adult use program. So the opportunity for Florida to be a really successful, notwithstanding the sort of the political dynamics that exist down there, if Florida can get across the finish line and show that adult cannabis can be done in an appropriate way that creates successes for all the stakeholders down there, that's a big message that now is present in a state that may lean a bit more right than maybe other states that have gone adult use in the recent past. So it's important.
Again, but with Ohio, I feel like that one is sort of a little bit more conservative. I know it can swing,
Yeah.
obviously, but just that it had such strong support is, I think, really encouraging, and I think does lend to the whole nonpartisan kind of issue for cannabis, which is important. Interesting to hear also, which I think is a continuation of a theme, very much the if or when, not if kind of thing for a lot of these states. And I don't know how much that boils over into the kind of federal side of things as well, but I think it's kind of a similar theme as well. In terms of states, are you guys, looking to kind of deepen your footprints currently where you have them, look at other states and kind of keep an eye out there, keep where you are and kind of build up product? What's sort of the sense in terms of this full year?
Yeah. I think with the refinements and enhancements that we made in 2023 to who we are and how we execute in our markets that are core, that fit within that definition, that get that attention, that get that resource, we can build that scale and we can create that success. It does allow us to be explorative in looking at these other markets, and where we're at and kind of how we look at them is a little bit different than maybe how we looked at them in prior years, of really focusing on what's the right way to enter a state and a state program. Because it used to be, if you go back to the 2014s to maybe 2020, there was a pretty consistent way that you get into a state. It's capital intensive, it's asset heavy, a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. And I think as this industry continues to mature, and especially with some of these markets that have recently launched adult use programs, that may not be necessarily the optimum way to go into that market today. So we just want to make sure that we're smart, we're learning from our experiences, and making some really solid data-based decisions. But we definitely want to expand our footprint. It really is how and when.
Great to hear that. I feel like there's a little bit of a kind of bracing for things to change, things to get better. I know obviously no one's ever planning or guaranteeing that happens, of course, but that's good to hear. I think that things are kind of moving in that direction. So that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Would love to hear, I think, let's talk about the legislative stuff first, and then we'll get into some fun product stuff as well. Would love to hear anything that we can do, influence, anything we can do to make any sort of impact, make any sort of difference, or is it really just fully hands off and waiting for anything, whether that's DEA rescheduling or, of course, even something like SAFER, which I know people are less excited about. Makes sense, but
sure. I would never tell anybody to sit on their hands. So if you wanted to reach out to your local representatives, legislators, et cetera, to make your voice heard, encourage it. It never hurts. And it is needed. Rescheduling is on its own path, right? I think it's part of the process is underway. Again, nothing has changed there from a from an outcome or an expected outcome standpoint than what we've talked about for months. I think that HHS recommendation was fairly clear, and everybody can speculate as to whether this will follow traditional course or suit, and what that means for the DEA, or if it'll be different this time. But I think we'll know when we get more information on the DEA's position. When that'll happen, look, I wouldn't.
Nobody knows.
I wouldn't right. It's
Sure.
definitely one of those things that are outside of our control. But
Mhm.
I think the expected position and outcome still remain. On the safer front, I think there's an opportunity here. It's important for everybody to realize, like, 2023 calendar year may be over, but the 2023 kind of legislative calendar was extended. So, theoretically, until I guess February 2nd, we're still dealing with 2023 legislative calendar and initiatives. And so I know that there's a lot of work going on in DC right now about what is possible. And I can comfortably say the cannabis conversation is still alive and happening. So what that means, we'll see. But there's still a window here where something could happen. And we're going to continue to keep our foot on the gas, that's for sure, and stay engaged.
Fantastic. Again, it seems like you guys are doing a lot of great work in terms of trying to push that political side of things. I know not necessarily with the DEA, but I know with Representative Dave Joyce, that was a fantastic sort of connection you had made, and continuing to push and take what you can into your own hands is super, super important. So appreciate you doing all that work. That actually does remind me. So I know during that meeting that you had a few months ago, part of the discussion was around doing tours and trying to invite people in to kind of show them that the industry is really just a pretty traditional industry and pretty not boring, but it is a normal business. Are you guys doing anything closer to that to try to invite kind of politicians in to get them kind of familiarized? Anything kind of on that side of things as well?
Yes. So, subsequent to that meeting we have, and that'll continue. Look, at the end of the day, like the strongest lobbying, quote unquote, platform is really, you should think about it as educating. That's what it is. Like, the cannabis story is an incredible story, and it's actually a fairly, I would say, straightforward, common sense focused, objective story to be told. We have to tell it, because it won't tell itself. The story that cannabis has told on its own, by itself, is the legacy story for the past few generations. That's the current story that has been told. And it is up to us. It's up to the stakeholders that are in the industry, operators, and the extended group of stakeholders, to make sure that this cannabis story gets told. So that's how we look at the efforts that we put forward, and whether it's DC at a federal level or in any of the states that are evaluating a more progressive approach to cannabis, is showing them, like, open kimono, come see what it is behind the curtain. And to your point, it is a very traditional, responsible and professional industry, because that's how these states have passed these laws. They're focused on public safety. They're focused on public health. They're focused on economic opportunity. And those are fundamentally sound perspectives for any legislator on either side of the aisle. You have to get them to the store. You have to get them to the facility. They need to see the employees. They need to see the track and trace. They need to see that, the diversion prevention components are in there, whether it's from a product standpoint or from a cash management standpoint, like all those things. But once they see it, it's a fairly easy story to understand.
Yep, I totally agree. And definitely want them to see and experience the precautions and all of the sort of regulation that's built in and baked in that you guys spend the time and effort and money to do. But also, maybe they need to try product as well, potentially. What would you recommend? I would say probably a lower level, I'm guessing, of THC concentration. What would be your politician recommendation if someone came in and was like, actually, let me get the full experience and try it out?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can tell you from firsthand experience, the topical. I think a topical is a dip the toe in the water sort of thing, that you could have success in getting a federal legislator to actually participate in. So,
Yeah.
and then from there you can incremental baby steps. But look, in 2023, we're able to get that actual result of having one of them or multiple of them want to experience it. I don't think, if you go back to 93, that would not have been the case. 2003, that would not have been the case. So 2013, that would not have been the case. So the progress is there. Again, the opportunity for cannabis to get reform at a federal level we've never been closer. I know it's not going to satisfy the timing desires of all of us, but we've never been closer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know everyone wants everything yesterday, which I totally understand. It's been a long slog, probably not as long. Most people haven't been in it as long as you have, just because you've been in the industry for a while now. But I get it. I think it's one of those things where it's common sense for people to have access to cannabis. So people want it immediately, which I get, but we're not quite there yet. But it does seem like things are teeing up nicely, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Final thing that I did want to touch on, just because 2024 is a little bit of a different year than 2023 because of the political overlay with sort of the presidential election and everything. Any insight there in terms of how that affects things, either from a candidate level or just sort of generally having that extra political pressure in the mix this year?
I think this is where I would go back to the Ohio outcome. And you made a great point. The Ohio outcome was important. It's a kind of a swing state that tends to lean a little bit more right than left, where it was on the ballot. And so it wasn't a legislative initiative in as much as it was the people speaking, and the turnout was strong, and it was matched up with another very high profile issue. And it overall slightly outperformed that other issue with support. And you had scenarios too where you had a split ticket, so to speak, on certain counties within Ohio where they actually voted no against the other issue and voted yes for cannabis legalization. So like the data that can be extracted from that outcome, I think, is really important, especially as all of these candidates are thinking about how they get the votes that they need to be successful. So I think for sure this is it's a good opportunity for more focus to be brought to cannabis. Hopefully, again, you see some movement on it, even with this trailing 2023 legislative initiatives. But I think the opportunity for more progress in 24 and asking the questions and making sure that we're getting the answers and positions solidified on how various candidates feel about this is an important opportunity for us to take. So again, opportunities for all of us stakeholders to lean in and help tell the cannabis story.
Yep, that sounds good. Be vocal out there. Keep riding it. Keep trying to tell that story and provide that education. Definitely. All right. Well, then I think this has been super insightful and fantastic. Any sort of final thoughts as we wrap up here?
No, excited about the year. I think that this is a big year for cannabis, big year for Cresco Labs. Ready for it, excited about it, and thanks for having me today.
Fantastic. All right, great for being on. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Everyone out there, also thanks for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Thanks so much again.
Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at advisorshares.com.